So listen to this. Ballon d'Or used to be the finish line, the kind of thing you earned after years of scars, comebacks, and proof. Yet now, we're watching teenagers get pulled into the Ballon d'Or conversation before their careers have even had time to become real. Not because they've already built a legacy, but because the sport has decided to start selling the legacy first. Everyone believes early praise is fuel, but what if the talk isn't motivating them at all? What if it's rewriting their careers in real time, turning development into a public trial, where every quiet game looks like a failure? Here's the question this case file is really asking. When does Ballon d'Or talk become motivation? And when does it quietly turn into a burden that a young career can't escape? This is not a debate about who deserves trophies, and it's not a prediction video about future winners. It's an investigation into what happens when football starts talking about greatness before a player has even learned how to fail in private. Because once a teenager is placed inside the Ballon d'Or conversation, every match stops being a step in development and starts becoming evidence. Evidence for or against a future that hasn't actually happened yet. And in modern football, those narratives don't just describe careers, they shape them. For most of its history, the Ballon d'Or worked like a mirror. It reflected what a player had already become. It arrived after years of accumulation, of matches played, roles mastered, expectations survived. Winning it meant your story had been written, not that it was about to begin. But somewhere along the way, that mirror turned into a spotlight. And once that happened, the awards stopped summarizing careers and started influencing them. The change didn't happen overnight. It happened gradually, almost politely. The language shifted first. Journalists stopped asking who was the best player in the world and began asking who could be the next one. The award itself didn't change, but the conversation around it did. Ballon d'Or level stopped being a destination and became a label, a projection, something you could apply to potential instead of performance. That shift matters more than it seems, because once an award becomes a conversation rather than a conclusion, it no longer waits, it accelerates. A great month becomes a prediction, a strong debut becomes a promise, and a teenager, still learning what their role even is, suddenly finds their development framed as a countdown, not toward improvement, but toward validation. This is where the danger begins. The Ballon d'Or was never designed to evaluate incomplete players. It was built to crown finished ones. When you pull that logic forward in time, you create a mismatch. Young players aren't measured against their peers anymore. They're measured against an imagined future version of themselves, one that may never exist but is constantly demanded anyway. And once that expectation is set, it doesn't reset easily. The conversation doesn't pause when form dips. It doesn't adjust when roles change. It doesn't care about adaptation or context. It only asks one question, over and over again. Is this what a future Ballon d'Or winner looks like today? That's how an award designed to honor patience quietly became allergic to it. At first, the pressure doesn't arrive loudly. There's no confrontation, no ultimatum from a coach, no warning label attached to the praise. It arrives quietly, disguised as approval. Compliments turn into expectations, and expectations slowly harden into standards that are impossible to see but impossible to escape. Once a young player is placed inside Ballon d'Or talk, the pitch changes shape around them. Every touch is no longer just a decision, it's a statement. Every missed chance stops being part of learning and starts feeling like evidence. Evidence that the conversation may have been premature. Evidence that the hype might have been wrong. And that shift happens long before the player is emotionally or professionally equipped to deal with it. What makes this pressure so damaging is that it's largely invisible. Coaches can manage minutes, clubs can protect contracts, but no one can shield a teenager from the weight of interpretation. Because now, they're not just playing football, they're performing inside a narrative that follows them everywhere. Commentary doesn't describe what they did, but what they failed to confirm. Analysis doesn't ask whether they played well, but whether they looked like the future that had already been promised. This creates a subtle distortion in development. Young players stop experimenting, risk feels dangerous, safe choices feel necessary. Creativity becomes cautious, not because confidence is gone, but because the cost of getting it wrong has been redefined. When you're labeled as generational, mistakes don't feel temporary, they feel like cracks in an identity you didn't choose but are expected to uphold. And there's another layer to this pressure that rarely gets discussed. Ballon d'Or talk doesn't just raise expectations from the outside, it alters the internal dialogue of the player themselves. Progress stops being measured in improvement and starts being measured in confirmation. Not, am I learning, but am I proving them right? That's a heavy question for anyone. For a teenager, it can quietly reshape how they understand success and failure altogether. The cruel irony is that football has always required patience to develop greatness. But once a player is elevated too early, patience becomes something they're no longer allowed to ask for. The room to grow shrinks. The margin for error tightens, and development, which should be non-linear, starts being judged as a straight line toward a destination they never agreed to reach on that timeline. This is how praise, when it arrives too early, stops feeling like support and starts acting like surveillance.
By this point, it's tempting to believe that Ballon d'Or talk begins with the player, that it's driven by ambition, ego, or the modern obsession with status. But this is where the Casefile turns. Because in most situations, the conversation doesn't start on the pitch, it starts around it. And once you look closely, it becomes clear that early Ballon d'Or narratives exist because too many parts of the football ecosystem benefit from them. Media outlets need stories that travel faster than form. Potential travels better than patience. A teenager being the next anything generates more attention than a seasoned professional doing their job consistently. Awards talk simplifies complexity. It compresses long development arcs into short, clickable questions. Is he the future Ballon d'Or winner? Yes or no? That framing doesn't explain football, but it sells it. Agents understand this logic perfectly. Early association with elite awards inflates value, leverage, and visibility. It turns development into an asset and time into currency. When a player is linked to Ballon d'Or conversations early, negotiations shift, wages rise, expectations harden. And with them comes a subtle pressure to maintain a certain public image, even if the footballing reality hasn't caught up yet. Clubs, too, have reasons not to resist. In an attention economy, prestige attracts investment. A future Ballon d'Or candidate sounds better than a promising young player still figuring things out. The label becomes part of the marketing. It's rarely spoken outright, but it quietly shapes how players are presented, protected, and sometimes rushed. Then there's social media, where nuance has no oxygen. Highlights are extracted from context, quiet performances disappear, and debate thrives on extremes. You're either generational or overrated, rising or finished. In that environment, Ballon d'Or talk isn't analysis, it's fuel. And once a player becomes part of that fuel cycle, the conversation sustains itself regardless of reality. The twist here is simple but uncomfortable. The player is often the least powerful voice in the entire process. Ballon d'Or talk happens to them, not because of them. It's constructed by systems that profit from certainty, even when certainty doesn't exist yet. And once that machine starts moving,
It rarely asks whether the person inside it is ready. Early coronations don't come from belief alone. They come from incentives.
When you zoom out far enough, a clear imbalance appears. Early Ballon d'Or talk creates winners and losers long before a single trophy is handed out. And the uncomfortable truth is that the people who benefit most are rarely the ones stepping onto the pitch every weekend. The most obvious beneficiaries are the storytellers. Media platforms thrive on acceleration. They don't need certainty, they need momentum. A teenage player attached to Ballon d'Or language provides an endless supply of content without requiring resolution. Every performance becomes material. Every dip in form becomes drama. The story renews itself weekly, sometimes daily, without ever needing to reach a conclusion. In that economy, unfinished careers are more profitable than completed ones. Agents and commercial partners gain leverage as well. Early association with elite awards increases perceived value, not just in contracts, but in branding. Sponsorships are easier to justify when the narrative points upward. Long-term potential sounds safer than present reality, even when that reality is fragile. The player becomes an investment vehicle, their future success already priced into the present. Clubs, too, often enjoy the short-term upside. Prestige sells. A club linked to the next Ballon d'Or contender gains attention, relevance, and sometimes patience from supporters who believe they are watching the early chapters of greatness. Even when performances fluctuate, the promise of what might come next can temporarily shield decisions from scrutiny. But now consider who absorbs the cost when the conversation moves faster than development. The player does, and not in one dramatic collapse, but in smaller, quieter ways. Confidence becomes conditional. Every performance is evaluated against an imagined peak rather than current progress. Improvement is no longer enough, it has to look inevitable. There is also a cost that rarely appears on highlight reels or analytics dashboards: the loss of psychological privacy. Young players used to develop in relative obscurity, allowed to fail without explanation. Now every struggle demands a narrative. Every inconsistency invites diagnosis. The space to be unfinished, which is essential to growth, disappears. And once that space is gone, it rarely returns, because Ballon d'Or talk doesn't fade gently. It snaps. One week, a player is the future of football. The next, they're framed as a warning. The same system that accelerates praise accelerates dismissal. There is no middle ground, and there is no patience built into the structure. This is the hidden transaction at the heart of early awards discourse. Visibility is exchanged for pressure. Hype is exchanged for fragility. The ecosystem gains content, leverage, and excitement. The player inherits expectations they didn't create and timelines they can't control. And that raises a question football doesn't like to ask. If so many people benefit from talking about greatness early, why is the cost almost always paid later by the same young careers we claim to protect?
There's a reason early coronations in football so often feel uncomfortable in hindsight. Not because the talent wasn't real, but because the timeline was never fair. When a player is named too early, the game stops asking who they are becoming and starts demanding that they already be someone complete. Ballon d'Or talk carries a specific kind of weight because it isn't just praise, it's a role assignment. It tells a young player what their career is supposed to look like before they've had the chance to discover it themselves. And once that role is assigned, deviation becomes dangerous. Growth is messy. Careers bend, stall, and restart. But legacy narratives don't allow for detours. They expect a straight ascent. This is where many young careers quietly fracture.
not through one dramatic failure, but through constant comparison to a future version that exists only in public imagination. Every season that doesn't feel like escalation is framed as regression. Every adjustment period is treated as a warning sign. The player is no longer evaluated on football terms, but on narrative consistency. What makes this especially cruel is that development doesn't follow the logic of awards. Players mature at different speeds. Some peak early and stabilize. Others struggle, disappear, and return stronger. Football history is full of late bloomers whose greatness depended on time, not prophecy. Early Ballon d'Or talk interrupts that process by turning patience into suspicion. And once doubt enters the conversation, it tends to overwrite memory. The same clips that once symbolized promise are re-edited as evidence of overhype. The label flips. Future Ballon d'Or winner becomes never fulfilled his potential. The system that crowned early doesn't ask whether the crown itself contributed to the fall. In the end, being named too early rarely ends well because it replaces development with expectation. It asks young players to confirm a destiny instead of build one. And football, for all its obsession with greatness, has never been kind to those who are forced to carry a legacy before they've earned the chance to define it.
So maybe the real issue isn't whether teenagers are talented enough to be mentioned alongside football's greatest awards. Talent has never been the problem. The question is whether modern football knows how to handle potential without trying to monetize it, accelerate it, and crown it before it's ready. The Ballon d'Or was never designed to guide development. It was meant to recognize what had already survived time, pressure, and failure. When that logic is reversed, the award stops being a celebration and becomes a forecast. And forecasts, especially in football, are rarely kind to the people forced to live inside them. Early Ballon d'Or talk feels harmless because it sounds positive, but praise, when it arrives without protection, can be just as destabilizing as criticism. It narrows paths, it shortens patience, and it turns normal stages of growth into public tests that few young players are equipped to pass. So perhaps the most important question isn't whether a teenager could one day win the Ballon d'Or, it's whether football is willing to let them grow without demanding proof of greatness at every step. Because greatness has always required time, and when time is removed from the equation, what's left isn't destiny, it's pressure. This case file doesn't end with a verdict, it ends with a choice. Football can keep crowning futures early and wondering why so many burn out. Or it can remember that the most dangerous moment in a young career isn't failure, it's being crowned before you're allowed to become.